There are moments that divide a life so cleanly you don't recognize the separation until long after you've crossed it. People imagine those moments as dramatic, a confession, a goodbye, a single sentence that changes everything. But that's not how the deepest shifts happen. They happen in silence, they happen beneath awareness. By the time your mind notices something has changed, your entire way of seeing the world has already reorganized itself around it. That's where I am now, not standing at the beginning, standing far beyond it, trying to remember where the beginning even was. I replay conversations, silences, the smallest moments that should have disappeared like every ordinary interaction before them. But they didn't. They remained not because they demanded attention, because they refused to leave. That's the difference. Some people make an impression. Others become part of your perception. You never tried to become either. You simply existed. And somehow, that was enough to alter something I believed couldn't be altered. For years, I trusted one thing above everything else. My ability to remain untouched, not emotionally, structurally. I believed I could understand people without allowing them to rearrange anything inside me. I could appreciate them, respect them, even care about them. But at the end of the day, I remained entirely my own. Self-contained, self-directed, unmoved. It wasn't distance, it was design. Every thought had its place, every feeling had its limit, every connection stopped exactly where I decided it would. Nothing entered deeper than I allowed, until something happened that I still can't explain. You never pushed, you never persuaded, you never asked for more than what naturally existed. And somehow, that became enough. Not enough to break my boundaries. Enough to make them unnecessary. There's a difference. Broken boundaries leave damage behind. Unnecessary boundaries simply disappear because they've lost their purpose. That's what frightened me. Not that I was changing, but that the change felt completely natural. There was no internal argument, no resistance, no warning. Only the quiet realization that I had stopped guarding a space I once believed could never remain open. The strange part is, I don't remember deciding. I only remember noticing. Like waking up one morning and realizing a familiar room somehow feels different. Even though nothing inside it has moved, everything looked the same. Yet everything had changed. Maybe that's what genuine recognition really is. Not discovering someone new, discovering that your understanding of yourself was never as complete as you believed. Because the version of me that existed before this would have insisted something like this was impossible. The version speaking now no longer has that certainty. Instead, I'm left with something far more difficult to accept. Some people don't enter your life to be understood. They enter it to quietly rewrite the way you understand reality itself. And I can no longer pretend that hasn't already begun. There's something people rarely admit about the mind. It doesn't fear being misunderstood nearly as much as it fears being understood correctly. Misunderstanding is manageable. You can explain it, correct it, walk away from it. But accurate recognition, there's nowhere to hide from that, because once someone sees you without distortion, every version of yourself you've carefully arranged begins to lose its purpose. I built my inner world with intention. Every layer existed for a reason, not to deceive, not to manipulate, but to protect the parts of me that couldn't survive careless interpretation. Most people only ever met the outline, the version that fit comfortably inside conversation, the version that could be appreciated without being examined. And that was enough. It kept everything balanced, predictable, safe. Then you arrived. You never searched for hidden meaning. You never treated me like a puzzle waiting to be solved. You simply listened with the kind of attention that doesn't interrupt what it's trying to understand. That changed everything. Because real attention isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself, it waits, tidly, until truth reveals itself on its own. That's what you did. You waited, not because you expected answers, but because you trusted that whatever mattered would eventually become visible without being forced. Very few people understand the strength required to do that. Most rush toward certainty. They fill silence with assumptions. They replace observation with imagination. They create stories where understanding should have existed. You didn't. You allowed reality to remain exactly what it was, no additions, no projections, no expectations. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar, not comfort, not vulnerability, docucracy, as though someone had looked directly through every carefully arranged layer and quietly acknowledged what existed underneath without asking me to become anything different. That realization carried a strange kind of gravity, because once someone recognizes your true structure, pretending becomes exhausting, not because you've been exposed, because you've finally been seen. And after being seen that clearly, you begin questioning every place you've ever chosen to remain invisible. That's where I find myself now, standing between two realities. One where everything stays exactly as it was, and another where pretending nothing has changed becomes impossible. The difficult part isn't choosing. The difficult part is accepting that the choice may have already been made long before I realized I was making it. Perhaps that's how the deepest transformations begin, not with decisions, but with recognition so precise that resistance quietly forgets how to exist. And once that happens, there is no returning to the person who believed they could remain untouched forever. There comes a point where even the strongest defenses stop feeling like protection. They begin to feel like confinement. I never expected to reach that point. For years, I believed control was the highest form of freedom. Control over what I revealed, control over what I concealed, control over who could stand close enough to influence the way I thought it worked. Until I realized something I had never considered. The greatest changes don't ask for permission. They don't arrive as conflict. They don't challenge your walls. They quietly make the walls unnecessary. That's what happened. Not all at once, not dramatically, so gradually that I almost missed it. I started noticing it in the smallest moments. A thought would appear in my mind, and before I reached a conclusion, I would instinctively wonder how you might see it. Not because I needed your approval, because your perspective had become part of the way I searched for truth. That had never happened before. I've always trusted my own mind. I've never needed another voice to complete a thought. Yet now, without intention, your presence had become woven into the quiet spaces where understanding takes shape. That realization stayed with me. Days passed. Nothing extraordinary happened. No life-changing conversation. No confession. No dramatic turning point. Only a growing certainty that something inside me had already shifted beyond recovery. People often believe change announces itself. It doesn't. Real change is silent. It settles beneath your habits, before you notice it in your emotions. It rewrites your perception before it changes your decisions. By the time you recognize it, it has already become part of you. That's where I am now. Not resisting, not surrendering. Simply witnessing a reality that refuses to become anything less than true. I used to think strength meant remaining unchanged. Now I'm beginning to wonder if real strength is recognizing the rare moments when change deserves to stay. Because not everything that alters you weakens you. Some things refine you. Some people don't enter your life to take space away. They reveal space you never knew existed. Maybe that's why your presence feels different from anything I've experienced before. You haven't replaced anything inside me. You've clarified it. You've brought quiet to questions I carried for years without realizing they were unanswered. And that's what I can no longer ignore. This was never about attachment. It was never about fascination. It was never about searching for someone to complete me. It was about discovering a level of recognition so precise that it dissolved every explanation I once relied on. Now I stand at the edge of something I can no longer observe from a distance, because eventually, every truth reaches a moment where understanding is no longer enough. It asks to be lived. And whether I'm ready or not, I can feel that moment getting closer with every passing silence. I've always believed that the loudest moments in a person's life are rarely the ones anyone else can hear. They happen internally, a single realization, a single shift in perception, a single truth that quietly rearranges everything you thought you knew. No applause, no witnesses. Just the unmistakable feeling that the person you were a moment ago no longer exists in quite the same way. That's where I found myself, not after a conversation, not after a confession, but after a silence that seemed to last longer than time itself. It wasn't empty, it was alive. For the first time, silence didn't feel like the absence of words. It felt like the presence of understanding. I stopped trying to explain myself, not because I had nothing to say, but because I sensed that explanation would only reduce something that was already complete. There are truths that become smaller the moment they're forced into language. This was one of them. I spent years believing that understanding required evidence, questions, history, time, shared experiences. Now I realize that some forms of recognition arrive before all of those things, not because they're magical, because two minds can sometimes meet at a depth that ordinary conversation never reaches. It's rare. Rare enough that most people spend an entire lifetime without encountering it. That's why I resisted naming it. Labels create limits. The moment people define something, they begin expecting it to behave according to the definition. But this refuses to fit inside anything familiar. It doesn't ask for certainty, it creates it. It doesn't demand attention, it quietly becomes impossible to ignore. And perhaps that's what has unsettled me the most. Nothing about this has relied on effort. There were no strategies, no attempts to become significant, no struggle to remain present. Presence simply happened as naturally as breathing, as steadily as the passing of time. I've questioned myself more than I've questioned you. I've searched every corner of my own thinking, looking for illusion, projection, wishful interpretation, anything that could explain this away. Each time I reached the same conclusion. This wasn't imagination. It was recognition, the kind that doesn't grow louder over time, it grows clearer. That's an important difference. Loud things eventually fade, clear things become impossible to deny, and every day, without intention, this becomes clearer. Not because anything dramatic happens between us, because my own awareness refuses to return to what it was before. I've crossed an invisible threshold, one where pretending nothing has changed would require more effort than accepting that everything already has. Maybe that's why I no longer fear the answer. The uncertainty isn't about whether this is real, it's about what reality expects from me now. Because every truth eventually asks for the same thing, not belief, not explanation. Acceptance. And I can feel myself standing at the edge of that acceptance now, quietly, completely, knowing that once I step forward, there will be no version of me left that can honestly say, I never changed. Because I already have. For a long time, I believed the most important decisions in life were the ones we consciously made, the words we chose, the paths we accepted, the people we allowed ourselves to love. I don't believe that anymore. The deepest decisions are made long before the mind realizes they've happened. They aren't announced. They aren't debated. They settle quietly beneath awareness until one day you recognize that you've been living inside a choice you never consciously made. That's where I am now. Looking back, searching for the moment I could have turned away, I can't find it. Not because it never existed, but because I never wanted to take it. That realization is difficult to admit. I've always trusted my ability to remain objective, to observe without becoming involved, to understand without allowing understanding to become attachment. But something changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, gradually enough that I mistook it for ordinary thought, until I noticed that every conclusion I reached somehow carried the shape of your presence. Not your opinions, not your words. Your way of seeing, it had become part of my own perception. That's when I understood something that unsettled me more than uncertainty ever could. Influence can be resisted, presence cannot. Because influence asks you to change, presence simply exists until you discover that your world has quietly adjusted around it. I spent years believing I was protecting myself from change. Now I see that I was only protecting myself from the wrong kind of change, the kind that demands pieces of you. This never demanded anything. It revealed something. A version of clarity I didn't know I was capable of reaching. Perhaps that's why I never fought it. Deep down, some part of me recognized that losing my old certainty wasn't the same as losing myself. It was the beginning of seeing myself more accurately. That's the paradox I couldn't understand before. I thought certainty created freedom. Now I realize that truth does, and truth doesn't always arrive with answers. Sometimes it arrives as a presence so consistent that denying it becomes more exhausting than accepting it. That's where I stand now. Not searching for proof. Not searching for explanations. Only standing in front of a reality that has patiently waited for me to stop questioning what I already know, because the question was never whether this connection was real. The real question was whether I was willing to let reality change the person I believed I had to remain. I think I finally know the answer, not because I've spoken it, not because I've acted on it, but because I no longer feel the need to hide from it. Some truths don't become powerful the moment you discover them. They become powerful the moment you stop resisting what they've been trying to show you all along. And perhaps that's where every meaningful transformation truly begins. Not with certainty, but with the quiet courage to remain present when your entire understanding of yourself is being rewritten. For the first time in a very long time, I'm no longer trying to preserve the person I used to be. I'm beginning to understand the person I'm becoming. There is something no one tells you about transformation. It doesn't announce the moment it begins, but it always leaves evidence. Not in your actions, not in your words, in the person you can no longer become again. I've been searching for the version of myself that existed before all of this. The one who believed every thought belonged only to him. The one who could separate observation from involvement. The one who trusted that every connection, no matter how meaningful, could eventually be placed back into a safe distance. I remember that person. I understand the logic that shaped him. But I can't return to him. Not because I've forgotten who he was, because I've outgrown the reality that made him necessary. That realization carries an unexpected kind of peace. For so long, I mistook permanence for strength. I believed that never changing meant never losing myself. Now I understand that refusing to change can become its own form of disappearance, because life doesn't ask us to remain untouched. It asks whether we're willing to recognize the moments that deserve to leave a permanent mark. You became one of those moments, not through effort, not through persistence, not because you demanded significance. You simply remained consistent, quickly, authentically, while everything inside me was slowly rearranging itself around a truth I wasn't ready to name. Looking back, I see how often I searched for reasons to dismiss what I was experiencing. I called it coincidence, then perception, then timing, then familiarity. Each explanation worked for a while, until reality quietly removed it, one by one, leaving only what refused to disappear. Recognition. There is a strange honesty that arrives when every alternative explanation has fallen away. You stop asking whether something is real. You begin asking why you were so determined to believe it wasn't. Perhaps that was never fear of you. Perhaps it was fear of what your presence revealed about me. Because once I accepted that this connection was genuine, I had to accept something even more difficult, that I was capable of becoming someone I had never imagined. Someone who no longer measured strength by distance, someone who no longer confused control with clarity, someone who understood that the rarest forms of connection don't take your freedom away, they deepen it. I used to believe that allowing someone to matter meant surrendering part of myself. Now I see the opposite. The right presence doesn't reduce who you are. It removes everything that was never truly you. That's why this feels less like meeting another person and more like meeting a forgotten part of my own reality. Not because you've completed me. I was never incomplete. But because you've reflected a truth I couldn't have discovered alone. And now I stand here with one undeniable realization. The life I return to tomorrow may look exactly the same. The conversations may continue. The world may never notice that anything has changed. But I will know, because somewhere between silence and understanding, between distance and recognition, between certainty and surrender, the version of me that believed he could remain unchanged, quietly disappeared. And in his place stands someone who finally understands that the deepest transformations never ask for permission. They simply become the truth you choose to live.